السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله على إحسانه وشكر له على تفضله وامتنانه، ولا إله إلا الله تعظيما لشأنه، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله داعي إلى رضوانه، وعلى آله وأصحابه وإخوانه. أما بعد، يا من يرى ما في الضمير ويسمع، أنت المعد لكل ما يتوقع، يا من يرجى لشدائد كلها، يا من إليه المشتكى والمفزع، يا من خزائن رزقه في قوله كن أمن فإن الخير عندك أجمع، ما لي سوى فقرك إليك وسيلة، فبالافتقار إليك فقر أدفع، ما لي سوى قرع لبابك حيلة، فلئن رددت فأي باب أقرع، وما الذي أدعو أهتف باسمه إن كان فضلك عن فقيرك يمنع، حاشا لمجدك أن تقنت عاسيا، الفضل أجزل والمواهب أوسع. إخواني في الله, we are continuing our lecture series regarding the state of the believers, the righteous Muslims on the Day of Judgment. The day the sun will be brought just a mile above our heads, and the people will be drowning in their own sweat. Some of them people, the sweat will reach their ankles. Some of them, the sweat will reach their knees. Some, the sweat will reach the ears. And some of the people on the Day of Judgment, they shall drown in their own sweat. On that day, Ikhwani fillah, a select few from the servants of Allah Azza wa Jal shall be given the shade from the shade of the throne of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he says in a hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, he says, سَبْعَةٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. 7 people, I shall tell you 7 people who will be given a shade on the Day of Judgment. On the day there is no shade other than the shade of Allah Azza wa Jal. Now the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions the categories. Number 1, he says, Al-Imam al-Adil. He says the leader who is just. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا اِعْدِلُوا. You should not make enmity towards people prevent you from being just. Always be just. Even to your own enemies, be just. So the first person is the Imam al-Adil. And this covers every part of leadership. You in your business, you're a manager, you're a director, you're a school headmaster, in your own house, you're the father, be just, be fair. You have children, you cannot give one child a present and you leave this other child. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you have 2 wives, 3 wives, فَلَا تَمِيلُ كُلَّ الْمَيْلِ فَتَذَرُوهَا كَالْمُعَلَّقَةِ. Do not look towards this wife so much that you forget this other wife. Always be just in everything. In your wives, in your children, in your wealth, in everything you have to be just. So the first category is Al-Imam Al-Adil. And this, the best example in our history is, of course, the Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam, the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. In our history also you have someone called Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he was the leader of the Muslims from the year 99 to the year 101. This man, Ikhwani fillah, we'll look at his history inshallah. He became the Khalifa of the Muslims. He says, every wealth that we and my family have taken has to be returned first. So he starts with himself and his family, and he takes back all the wealth that was taken by corruption. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed this man and his rulership. That is the greatest rule ever in Islamic history. Up to now, we have not seen such a thing where Muslims are not in no need for sadaqah. They don't need any sadaqah. There was no single beggar during the time of this Imam, and he only led the Muslims for 2.5 years until he was killed and poisoned by his slave. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, Al-Imam Al-Adil. The second category of the people we mentioned yesterday, they'll be given a shade on the Day of Judgment. Shabun nasha'a fi ibadati rabbih. The young boy who was brought up in the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the best example you can think of is from the Sahaba is Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu. This guy or this man or this boy, he was the first Muslim boy in Islamic history. If you ask who's the first man to accept Islam, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. The first woman, Khadija. The first boy, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He was brought up in a state of Iman, brought up under the teaching of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The third category, رَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. The man whose heart is attached to the mosques. He wants to be, it's not he's spending the entire day in the mosque, no. He has his other work, but between work and mosque, he always finds a balance. He says, it's the time of dhuhr. I have to prepare myself 30 minutes before Salatul Dhuhr. I'm near the mosque. His heart is always attached to the Baytullah, to the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the best example, Ikhwani Fillah, you can look in history, there's a man called Abidul Haramain. He was so attached to the two harams that he became known by it. Fudayl ibn Iyad rahimahullah, who is known as the worshipper of the two harams. The fourth category, رجلان تحابا في الله اجتمع عليه وتفرق عليه. Two people who love each other for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. When they're together, they love each other. When they're not even together, they love each other still. The best example, Ikhwani Fillah, that we've seen in love in our history is how the Sahaba used to love Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. One day the Quraysh, they come to the Prophet, to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiallahu anhu. Says, you've heard what your friend has said. Your friend has reached craziness levels very high. What is this? He says last night he traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem. In one night, we traveled for 1 month from Mecca to Jerusalem. He's saying that he traveled in one night. Your friend is bringing something new. That's referring to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, look at the friendship and the love. إن كان قد قاله, if he has said it, then he has spoken the truth. He says, Subhanallah. Why are you saying that he has said the truth? You've not even heard from him. You have not even listened to him. But you believe what I'm narrating about you. Look at the love this man has for the Prophet ﷺ. He says to the Quraysh, you guys are not normal. I believe him with bringing a message from the seventh heaven. And I believe him. What is farther, from here to the seventh heaven or from Mecca to Jerusalem? The people were amazed. That was the love that this man Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiallahu anhu had for the Prophet ﷺ. The love, sincere love for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Aisha radhiallahu anha, she says, Wallahi, I've never seen or I've never thought that people will cry because of happiness until I saw my father one day. Says, one day the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca comes at the time of Dhuhr, about 12 p.m., 1 p.m., when the sun is very hot. And he says to Abu Bakr the following words. He says, Ya Abu Bakr, udhina li bil hijrah. I have given permission to perform the hijrah with you. He says, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, as-suhbatu ya Rasulullah, will I be your companion in this journey, O Prophet of Allah? He says, Na'am, you shall be my companion in this historic journey of the hijrah from Mecca to Medina. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiallahu anhu, he starts crying out of happiness. Look how much love he had for the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. When the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was about to die, he says, لو كنت متخذا خليلا من أمتي. If I was going to take the close friend from my ummah, I'll take Abu Bakr as-Siddiq as my closest friend. All his wealth he had kept from me. I take from his wealth as I please. And I'm not able to pay Abu Bakr. He's the only person that has a favor upon me. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiallahu anhu. Look at the love that this man had for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. One of the enemies of Islam at the time, Urwa ibn Mas'ud al-Thaqafi radhiallahu anhu, he says, in Sulh Hudaybiyah, he says, Wallahi, I have gone to visit the kings of Rome, and I visited the king of Persia. والله ما رأيت أحدا يحب أحدا كحب أصحاب محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Says, Wallahi, I have visited the kings of this world. I visited the Roman Empire, I have seen Caesar. I visited the Persian Empire, I have seen Kisra. Wallahi, I've never seen a person who's beloved by his servants or by the ones who follow him, like how the companions, they love Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the pinnacle of love. And we as Muslims also, we have that brotherhood. We have that love for each other, regardless of our tribes, our nationality, or color. The Muslim in China who's been oppressed is our brother. We love him for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. We love our Muslim brothers. So this is the fourth category. رَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّ فِي اللَّهِ اجْتَمَعَ عَلَيْهِ وَتَفَرَّقَ عَلَيْهِ. Two brothers, two men, they love each other for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal when they're together and also when they're not together. We mentioned the bro code. If you want to be true, sincere brothers, read Surah Al-Hujurat. You cannot be my brother, or I cannot be your brother, yet I am gossiping about you. اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعد الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا. You cannot spy on me as my brother. You cannot mock me. You cannot give me bad nicknames. All these things prevent the true love that we should have as Muslims. Then the Prophet ﷺ continues, amongst the people who will be given a shade on the day of judgment, he says, وَرَجُلٌ دَعَتْهُ امْرَأَةٌ ذَاتُ مَنْصِبٍ وَجَمَالٍ فَقَالَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهِ. He says that this man, young man, a woman calls him, who is beautiful. That woman is beautiful, number one. Number two, she has status, she has position in society. She's perhaps the leader's wife or leader's daughter. She's someone who has position in society. So this lady who's beautiful, who has position in society, he calls this man to fornicate, to do the act of zina. فَقَالَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهِ. He says, your beauty is nothing to me. I fear Allah Azza wa Jal. This is a person who will be given a shade on the day of judgment. And the best example, ikhwani fillah, from chapter 12 of the Quran, Surah to Yusuf. Yusuf alayhi salam, he is kidnapped or he's sold into slavery. He goes to Egypt. He's alone, no family, no friends, no bloodline in Egypt. Then the minister's wife gets obsessed with Yusuf alayhi salam, and she beautifies herself, and she locks the doors, and she says to him, yes, I'm here for you. What does Yusuf alayhi salam say? He says, مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ إِنَّهُ رَبِّي أَحْسَنَ مَثْوَايَ. مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ, may Allah protect me. That is my Lord, or that is my master who has been good to me. How can I do such a thing? Later on, the women are gathered and they start cutting their fingers when they're obsessed with the beauty of Yusuf alayhi salam. And they want zina with this boy, this young man. He has all the reasons to commit zina. He has no family. He is a young man. The shahawat, the desires are there as a young man. But he says, "As-sijnu ahabbu ilayya." Prison is more beloved for me than acting in such a manner. That is the true iman, ikhwani fillah, the fear for Allah Azza wa Jal. A funny story, ikhwani fillah. I don't remember this story. It's a long time ago I was told. One of the scholars one day, one of the ladies, they loved the scholar so much. So she tries everything to make the scholar have a relation with her, but the scholar doesn't do anything. So he says one day, she uses a trick anyway, for the guy to come, or the sheikh to come to the house. So the sheikh comes to the house, maybe for ruqya or whatever, any purpose. I don't know what trick she used, I can't remember. Then she locks the door. She removes her clothes and says, either you do the act with me right now, or I will accuse you of raping me. What will you do? So the sheikh thinks for a while. Then he says, let me go to the washroom, I prepare myself. He goes to the washroom, it's not a good story anyway, and he takes the najasa, that is the washroom, and he covers himself with it. And he comes out to the woman, says, I'm ready for you. The woman says, subhanallah, crazy man, get out of the house. But he protected his honor, he protected his ird, and he protected his name in doing it in such a manner. Inni akhafu Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Whoever fears the status or the position or the status of Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant him a residence in paradise. So always remember, before you do any sin, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you. If you have that remembrance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you, then zina, alcohol, mira, all these sins, Instagram, bad pictures, all of it becomes less. It becomes easier for you to live it. Number 6 category, ikhwani fillah, of the people who will be given a shade on the day there is no shade other than the shade of Allah Azza wa Jal. رجل أنفق تصدق. A man gives out sadaqah. فأخفاها حتى لا تعلم شماله ما تنفق يمينه. And he hides his sadaqah so much that even his left hand does not know what his right hand has given out. This is a person who loves giving sadaqah in secret. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إن تبدوا الصدقات فنعما هي وإن تخفوها وتؤتوها الفقراء فهو خير لكم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you give out sadaqah openly, in public, so that other Muslims might get morale also and they give sadaqah, it is something good. But if you hide it and give it to the poor people, that is better for you. So sadaqah is something that removes the anger of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he says that protect yourself from the hellfire walau bi shiqqi tamra, even if it is a part of a debt. So sadaqah protects you. So the Muslims, ikhwani fillah, the ones who will be given a shade on the day of judgment, they are the ones who give sadaqah. They give charity out, but they hide that charity. No one knows about it. From the best examples, ikhwani fillah, you have a man called Ali ibn Hussein, ibn Ali, ibn Abi Talib, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. This man is the grandson, he's the son of Hussein, the grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and the great-grandson of who? Of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. فَهُوَ مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. He is known as Zayn al-Abidin. Zayn al-Abidin. Muhammad ibn Ishaq radiyallahu anhu rahimahullah, the author of Sirah, says, when this man passed away, Zayn al-Abidin, 100 families from the families of Medina, they complained there was no food. Says what? Says every single night we used to get food in our front door and we did not know where that food came from. The next day they're washing the imam, but janazah. Then they see black marks on the back of the imam. They wonder, where does this imam have these black marks? These are marks of people who carry heavy luggage. But we did not know that the imam was carrying heavy luggage. Ikhwani fillah, when he died, that's when his secret was discovered. This man, every single night, he goes, he gets his flour, his barley, his grains, whatever he can get from food, and he goes and distributes it to 100 families from the families of Medina. And this was a secret between him and Allah Azza wa Jal. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radhiallahu anhu, he was the Khalifa of the Muslims. He used to go to a house of an old lady, and he prepares and cleans everything of that house, and he does not say a single word, and he leaves the house. One day Umar radiallahu anhu follows him, and he sees what he's doing. When Abu Bakr died, then Umar came, he started doing the same thing, cleaning the house, preparing the flour for the old lady, cooking her food and everything, then he leaves. The lady one day asks Umar, did your companion die? He says, how did you know my companion died? He says, you don't make the flour the same way he was making, radiallahu anhu. This is a secret that they had, ikhwani fillah. These are people who have purchased Jannah with their acts in dunya. And the final example, ikhwani fillah, from the 7 who are promised. Just another story, ikhwani fillah. In Kenya we have the issue, every day we see about Saudi Arabia and the maids. But there's some good Saudis. We have lived in Saudi Arabia and we have seen some excellent Saudis. From one of the stories we were told, ikhwani fillah, by one of our sheikhs, he says, there's a town near Riyadh, the capital city of Saudi Arabia. It's called Huraymalah. Says there was a lady in that town, she had blood cancer, she had leukemia. So she goes to all the doctors and she's told, we can't help you. We can't do much about it. You have blood cancer, you've reached a level, we can't help you. So she goes home. Then she notices something from her Indonesian maid. Says, every time this maid goes to the toilet, she spends a long time in the toilet. What's wrong? What's happening here? It's very strange for a person to be in the toilet for that long. A lady or a man, it's very strange. So he asks the lady, why are you in the toilet for that long? The lady starts crying. Why in the toilet? She starts crying. So the lady asks, tell me the truth. She says, Wallahi, I gave birth about 3 weeks ago. And after I gave birth, just a few days later, I got this opportunity to come to Saudi Arabia to work as a maid and to earn income and supporting my family. So I left my baby and I came to Saudi, and my breasts are full of milk. So I have to go to the washroom every time to release the pressure. I have to remove the milk. Says, Subhanallah. Says, come here. This is your ticket to Indonesia. Go to Indonesia. This is your salary for the next 2 years. Go breastfeed your child. Once you finish breastfeeding your child, come back and see me and I'll give you a job. This is my telephone number. This is the telephone number of my family in case you don't reach me. If I've shifted or anything, you'll find me here. Your job is secure. Go. I've paid you salary for the next 2 years. The lady goes. She goes for her check, this lady from Huraymalah. And they do for her fahs, they scan. And there's no cancer in her body. All the cancer went. This is, if you're good to the people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is good to you. The final example, ikhwani fillah, from the people who will be given a shade on the day of, that there's no shade other than the shade of Allah Azza wa Jal. وَرَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَهُ مُتَّفَقٌ عَلَيْهِ. This is a man or lady, They sit in a private place where no one sees them. And they remember Allah Azza wa Jal. They remember the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal. They remember the punishment of Allah Azza wa Jal. They remember the verses, the signs, and everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. They remember what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the book. They remember how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored them over other people. فَفَادَتْ عَيْنَاهُ, they start crying. They start crying tears. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, عَيْنَانِ لَا تَمَسُّهُمَ النَّارِ, 2 eyes the hellfire will never touch. What are these 2 eyes the hellfire will never touch? He says, عَيْنٌ بَكَتْ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ, the eyes that cry because of the fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. وَعَيْنٌ بَاتَتْ تَحْرِسُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and the eyes that guard the borders of the Muslims so that the Muslims are not attacked by the enemies. These 2 eyes will never be touched by the hellfire. The whole body, they will not be amongst the people of the hellfire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَفَمِنْ هَذَا الْحَدِيثِ تَعْجَبُونَ وَتَضْحَكُونَ وَلَا تَبْكُونَ وَأَنْتُمْ سَامِدُونَ. Why are you laughing? Why are you not crying? The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam says, لو كنتم تعلمون ما أعلم ضحكتم قليلا ولا بكيتم كثيرا. If you only knew what I knew, you will be crying more than you laugh. So ikhwani fillah, from the attributes of the believers is when they private, they cry. They cry for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Not when you come to the mosque when everyone is seeing you, or when you are leading the prayer, so you want people to say, MashaAllah, this Imam, this Qari, he has a beautiful voice and he fears Allah is crying. No, try holding your tears even as an Imam if you're able to. Try it. Don't make people believe or see you as being righteous or one who cries in fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. That is something for you to do, for you to do in private. That is something not for the public eye. So cry when you're in private, not in public, to the best of your capability. Sometimes it overwhelms a person. There is no harm, ikhwani fillah. Amongst the greatest examples is our Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. One day he goes to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, and he says to him, "Oh Abdullah, recite for me the Quran." So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud starts reciting from Surah An-Nisa until he reaches the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَكَيْفَ إِذَا جِئْنَا مِنْ كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ بِشَهِيدٍ وَجِئْنَا بِكَ عَلَى هَؤُلَاءِ شَهِيدًا. How is it, O Prophet, when we bring forth from every nation a witness, and we bring you as a witness against these people, or for these people? The Prophet will be made a witness on the day of judgment. And he remembers this great responsibility, this great work that he has on the day of judgment, and he starts crying tears. And he says, Hasbuk, that is sufficient. You have, ikhwani fillah, one of the Salaf, if you know the Imams of fiqh, the scholars who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised them to high levels. You have Imam Abu Hanifa Nu'man bin Thabit, died the year 150 of the Hijri calendar. Imam Malik 179, Imam Shafi 204, Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal 241. These 4 are the great madhabs. But you have other scholars even perhaps greater than them when it comes to fiqh. You have Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah. He had his own madhab. By madhab ended. Imam Sufyan al-Thawri passed away in the year 161 of the Hijri calendar. His madhab ended. You have another Imam, Layth ibn Sa'd from Egypt, one of the greats. And you have the Imam Abu Amr ibn al-Awza'i from the lands of Syria. This Imam, a lady one day comes to his house. Then he goes to the prayer place of the Imam, where the Imam prays Qiyamul Layl. And he finds it wet. She finds it wet. She says to the lady of the house, وَيْحَكِ أَرَاكِ غَفَلْتِ عَنْ بَعْدِ الْسِبْيَانِ حَتَّى بَالَ فِي مَسْجِدِ الشَّيْخِ. I see you've neglected the prayer place of the Sheikh until some little children have come to urinate here. It's very wet. The lady, the wife of Awza'i says, وَيْحَكِ هكذا يصبح كل ليلة من أثر الدموع الشيخ في صلاته. This is how the prayer place of the Imam is every single night, because of the tears that he has when he performs the Qiyamul Layl. أمن هو قانت آناء الليل. These are people who Qiyamul Layl, the people of the night prayer, the ones who fear Allah Azza wa Jal, and they cry for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Ikhwani fillah, we notice a thing about this all hadith. Number one, they have something to do in secrecy. There are some acts that should be between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. You don't need to tell people Monday and Thursday I'm fasting. Why should you tell people? Will they reward you? That should be a secret between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. Have a secret between you and Allah Azza wa Jal, that you meet Allah Azza wa Jal and He says, I have forgiven you because of that secret that you have with me. What is the secret that you have? That person who's giving sadaqah That was his secret. This other one was spending his night in fear of Allah Azza wa Jal, crying. He had his sadaqah. This person was in private with a woman. No one knows about it. No one sees him. But he says, Inni akhafullah. I fear Allah Azza wa Jal. So what is your secret with Allah Azza wa Jal? Number two, look at these people. They always remember Allah Azza wa Jal. They have a fear. They have a khawf of Allah Azza wa Jal. They are imams, they are leaders. They are able to oppress. They have armies, they have policemen, they have intelligence services. They have all the capacity to oppress, yet they do not oppress. The young man is able to go party. He is able to go fulfill his lusts and his desires. But he says, I fear Allah Azza wa Jal, and I am going to live a life of worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal. So these are the people who shall be given a shade on the day of judgment. The day there is no shade other than the shade of Allah Azza wa Jal. Other people mention the hadith, the person who is in debt. People have debts. You've given them money, they are unable to pay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as the Imam recited tonight, فَنَذِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٌ. You give them allowance, pay later, or you leave the debt entirely. The Prophet ﷺ says, whoever does that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him a shade from the shade of the day of judgment. So ikhwani fillah, this is a group of believers, a group of pious Muslims on the day of judgment. They shall be given a shade from the throne of Ar-Rahman. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all and our families from amongst them. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.